But first tonight on Point, the CDC finally admits failure. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky said for 75 years, CDC and public health have been preparing for COVID-19. And on our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations. Dr. Walensky's statement is admirable, but it's an acknowledgement of only half the problem. Not only did they fail, but anybody who dared disagree, who dared question them over the past 2.5 years got labeled a tin hat wearing, disinformation loving, crazy person. That might be the bigger problem. My goal, Walensky says, is a new public health action-oriented culture at CDC that emphasizes accountability, collaboration, communication, and timeliness. Of course, that statement is also half a statement. The other half is, please don't fire me. We could do a whole show, a series of shows, on the CDC and the Fauci failures over the pandemic. But let's just do a quick recap of the things science told us that proved wrong. February 2020, you don't need a mask. March 2020, wear a mask or you're a terrible person and going to kill grandma. In February of 2021, get the vaccine and you won't get COVID. That did not work out so well. By May of last year, the vax don't need masks, but they were back on in July, mask mandates for all. In August, President Biden said everyone needed a booster. In September, the CDC approved boosters for only some. At this moment, I know what you're thinking. What about shutting down schools that did more harm than good? What about masks for kids that made no sense? What about masks for thee and not for me? What about? As I said, we could do a whole show. Again, we have nothing personally against Walensky. It's not getting things wrong. It's the arrogance that you're right after having gotten so many things wrong.
So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science.
At least Walensky admits the massive failure, but still no apology to all of us who dared ask questions. It's okay, we have thick skin. Asking questions is our job. Here's a new question. Why aren't things getting any better? Today we learned the monkeypox vaccine maker can't meet increased demand for shots. We don't have time to go through the monkeypox screw-ups, but here's just, again, a short reminder. We could go back to the good old days in late May when monkeypox wasn't a risk at all, wasn't going to become a big deal. President Biden decided not to quarantine travelers, and the CDC said, don't worry about this. Today, we have more than 12,000 known cases, and testing remains a problem. Follow me here in this thought. The first step in Alcoholics Anonymous is admitting that we are powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable. Is it possible that Walensky and Fauci are drunk on power and their own TV clips? And Walensky just admitted it. That's on Point tonight. Dr. Gerard is here, former Assistant Secretary of Health for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Good to see you, Mr. Secretary. We appreciate it. I feel like we're going to have to wait a long time for a similar statement from Dr. Fauci.
Well, thanks for having me on. I'm not sure you'll ever get that statement from Dr. Fauci, but I do agree with you completely that if you're going to have the 12-step program analogy, this is like 1/10 of one step for the CDC. They have a huge way to go, but I take it as positive that they came on the record to admit they need to reform, and they need massive reform.
I'm wondering, when they talk about their shift here, the issues in the CDC seem to be two-part, right? There's the institutional arrogance, and then there's an organization built much more around studying odd things and academic research than actually preparing for a pandemic.
You're exactly right. Part of this is intrinsic to the CDC and part of it's extrinsic. So the CDC, both by their own means and by Congress, are studying everything from obesity and transgender rights down to infectious diseases. And we learned that they can't do infectious diseases right. I was really shocked when I was in office to know that during the pandemic, 90% of the CDC was doing work from home. If you have the CDC and 90% are not going to work during the pandemic, you know the organization is not focused. That's just the first part. The second is they have to be action-oriented. They have tended to evolve into an academic organization that takes months to think about everything, and they don't understand the reality of the crisis because they want to study it and get everything perfect. Well, that's not what we're faced with. The third thing I want to say, though, is I have enormous respect for individuals at the CDC. They are some of the finest professionals I've ever worked with. It's the organization and culture, and particularly in the Biden administration, the political leadership and political swaying of the science that we've seen that has really polluted the agency even more.
You think about the only effective government organization, or one of the only effective ones, is the U.S. military, which is decidedly apolitical, and that it's set up that way, it's designed that way for action. You talk about an action-oriented CDC. Is it possible to have that with a politically led situation?
It is not only possible, but it's absolutely essential. But you're not going to get that. Yes, you're not going to get an action-oriented CDC by having an academic advisory group or political operatives. What you're going to need is you're going to need real operators who have been on the ground, working with Ebola, working with COVID, actually advising and making the CDC operational. That's what's needed.
Is it possible for Dr. Walensky to make these changes that she said, or did that statement need, and I'm resigning so the White House can appoint somebody who can actually fix these problems?
The CDC has a $12 billion budget, 11,000 employees, people who've worked there for 20 or 30 years that know nothing different. Changing the direction of this huge ship is going to be difficult. I'll be honest, if Trump would have been reelected, my ask was to spend 6 months to reform the CDC because it's going to take enormous political will and the support of a president to really focus it. This is a jewel of America, really. It has been over the decade, but it's lost its luster, and it really needs to be changed. It needs to be depoliticized. It needs to be action-oriented. They need input from real people on the ground. They need to be fast. If you wonder why we needed private volunteers that you've heard so much at the beginning of the pandemic when the White House took over, it's because the CDC was basically absent from their job. Dr. Redfield did a great job trying to reform it. He moved it a long way from being an agency that studies history to a real public health agency, but there's an enormous long way still to go. 1/10 of that first of the 12-step program.
Well, perfect place to leave it. It's good to see you, sir, again. I know we used to talk a lot, and looking forward to it again.
Happy to do so. Glad to be on.
Thanks. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.